They say blood is thicker than water. They say family is supposed to protect you, to shield you from the storms of life. But what happens when the storm doesn't come from the outside? What happens when the storm comes from inside your own home? What happens when the very people you trust, the ones who should hold your hand the tightest, are the ones who push you into the fire? My name doesn't matter. You can call me the forgotten daughter, the one pushed into the shadows of her own family's story. All that matters is the truth. I'm about to tell you the truth of how I was betrayed, stripped of everything, left with nothing, and how I took it all back. This is not just a story about revenge. It's about survival. It's about learning that when your own blood poisons you, sometimes the only antidote is fire. I was born into a family that people envied. From the outside, we looked like the perfect portrait: wealth, respect, and a reputation that glittered like gold. My father was a powerful businessman, the kind people bowed to when he entered a room. My mother was the picture of grace, always smiling in public, her diamonds catching the light. And my older brother, well, he was the golden child, the heir, the one everyone adored. And then there was me, the daughter who was polite, quiet, and obedient. The one who learned early on that speaking too loudly meant being silenced, and asking for too much meant being called ungrateful. But despite all that, I loved them. Isn't that what we're taught? To love our family unconditionally, even when they bruise us with their words, even when they make us feel invisible. I loved my father most of all. He was stern, yes, but I always believed he loved me in his own quiet way. When I was little, he would place his hand on my head and tell me I was sharper than most. Those words carried me through every cold glance, every ignored cry for affection. But nothing could have prepared me for the day the foundation of my world collapsed. It began on a rainy evening. I remember because the sound of rain hitting the glass always used to comfort me. But that night, it felt like an omen. My father didn't come home for dinner. Hours passed. My mother sat at the table, her lips pressed into a thin line. My brother fiddled with his phone, irritation written across his face as though waiting for our father was an inconvenience. Then the phone rang. I can still hear the sound of my mother's gasp, the way her hand trembled so violently that the wine in her glass spilled across the white tablecloth. My brother snatched the phone from her, listened silently, and then hung up with a face I couldn't read. What happened? I whispered. His eyes finally met mine. Father's dead. The world tilted. The room spun. I remember the sound of my chair scraping against the marble floor, the way my body collapsed before I even realized I'd fallen. My father, gone, just like that. The days that followed were a blur of black clothes, whispered condolences, and faces I barely knew pressing their sympathy into my hands. But behind the heavy curtains of grief, something else was already brewing. Something darker. My father's empire, his business, his wealth, his legacy, it all had to be divided. And in families like mine, grief is just another mask. Beneath it lies greed. The will was read in a lawyer's office that smelled of old books and polished wood. My mother sat cold and stiff, my brother beside her with an expression that looked more like anticipation than mourning. I sat across from them, clutching the edge of my chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. And then the words came, the company. To my brother. The mansion. To my brother. The investments, the properties, the legacy. To my brother and me. A small trust fund. A few scraps, thrown at me like bones to a starving dog. I couldn't believe it. My father, The man who once told me I was sharper than most had left me almost nothing, or at least, that's what the papers said. When I looked up at my brother's smirk, when I caught the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes, I knew something wasn't right. This wasn't just my father's will, it was his doing. He had tampered with it, manipulated it, twisted my father's legacy to crown himself king while I was shoved into the dirt. I looked at my mother, silently begging her for an explanation, for some sign of comfort. But she wouldn't even meet my eyes. Her silence was louder than any words could be. She had chosen her side. That was the moment I realized I was alone, and worse, I had been betrayed by the very people I was supposed to trust. For weeks I sank into a darkness so heavy I thought I would never crawl out. I stayed in my room, curtains drawn, unable to eat, unable to sleep. I kept replaying it all in my head: my father's sudden death, the smirk on my brother's face, my mother's silence. But then, something inside me shifted. I don't know if it was rage, or grief, or simply the refusal to be erased. But one morning, I stood in front of the mirror, stared into my hollowed-out reflection, and whispered to myself, no more. They wanted me to be weak, to disappear quietly while they devoured everything. But I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. If my brother thought he could bury me, he had forgotten one thing. Seeds buried in the dark always find a way to rise, and I was done being the forgotten daughter. That was the day I began planning my revenge. Revenge doesn't begin with fire. It begins with silence. It begins with watching, listening, and waiting. I didn't storm into my brother's office. I didn't scream at my mother. I didn't beg for what was stolen from me. That's what they expected me to do. They expected me to break down, to make a scene, to prove that I was weak and emotional, the way they always painted me. No. I swallowed my anger whole, let it burn inside me like coal, and on the outside, I remained calm, invisible. But behind that mask of calm, I started to dig. The first clue came by accident. One evening, while sorting through my father's old study, I found a locked drawer. My brother had already taken most of the important documents, but this drawer, it had been overlooked. Or maybe he had assumed it held nothing of value. I broke the lock with trembling hands, half afraid of what I'd find. Inside, I found a journal. My father's handwriting, page after page of notes, numbers, deals, names, and at the bottom of one entry, just weeks before his death, a sentence that stopped my heart cold. I don't trust him anymore. If anything happens to me, look deeper. I didn't need to ask who him was. My father had suspected my brother. Suddenly, my father's heart attack didn't feel so natural anymore. I sat in that study all night, reading, piecing things together. My father had been preparing to change his will again, this time to balance the inheritance more fairly. He hadn't signed it yet. My brother must have known. And now, conveniently, my father was dead, and the will that favored him remained untouched. Coincidence? No, my brother hadn't just stolen my inheritance. He had stolen my father's life. That realization didn't break me, it steeled me. But I couldn't confront him yet. I had no proof, just whispers in ink and numbers in a journal. If I accused him now, he'd laugh in my face. No, I had to be smarter, daughters. Oh, I began to move in shadows. I started with people the family had overlooked, the ones my brother and mother dismissed as unimportant. Drivers, accountants, old employees who had been discarded when my brother took control, One of them was an old servant named Rahim. He had been with our family since I was a child, but after my father's death, my brother had fired him without hesitation. Dead weight, he called him. I found Rahim living in a small rented room on the edge of the city. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, his eyes filled with tears. He told me he had expected me to forget him like the rest of the family did, but I hadn't forgotten. And when I told him the truth that I believed my brother had a hand in my father's death, he didn't look surprised. He only lowered his voice and whispered, "I saw things I wasn't meant to see." That was the first crack. Rahim told me about late-night meetings, shady figures coming and going, and financial documents he had once been ordered to burn. He had hidden some of them, fearing something like this might happen. When he handed me a worn envelope filled with copies, my hands shook. Bank transfers, shell companies, evidence of money moving in and out of accounts my brother never disclosed. It wasn't enough to prove murder, but it was enough to prove corruption, and corruption I could use. Still, there was something else gnawing at me. A question that wouldn't let me sleep. Why had my mother stayed silent? I went to see her one evening, stepping into the mansion that had once been mine. She was sitting in the living room, sipping her wine like nothing had changed. Her diamonds sparkled under the chandelier, but her eyes, they looked empty. "Mother," I said softly, "why didn't you defend me?" She didn't answer right away. She just swirled her glass, watching the liquid catch the light. Finally, she said, "You don't understand how the world works. Your brother is strong. He knows how to survive. You were always too soft. If I had fought for you, I would have lost everything too." Her words hit me harder than any slap could have. She hadn't stayed silent because she was powerless. She had stayed silent because she had chosen survival over her own daughter. That was the night I stopped hoping my mother would come back to me. She was gone, lost to her own fear and greed. From then on, it was me against them all, and I was done playing nice. I started small. Anonymous tips to business rivals, strategic leaks to the press, documents that mysteriously found their way into the hands of auditors. My brother's empire wasn't as invincible as he thought. Every empire, no matter how powerful, has cracks, and with every careful push, I widened them. I watched from the shadows as his perfect image began to tarnish. Whispers in boardrooms, suspicious glances at charity galas, journalists asking questions he couldn't answer, and still, I kept my mask of silence. When he looked at me, he saw the forgotten sister, broken and defeated, but what he didn't see was the storm I was building, because I wasn't just after his money. I wasn't just after my inheritance. I wanted the truth. I wanted justice for my father, and I wanted my brother to crumble. Not because I destroyed him, but because his own sins devoured him whole, and soon, very soon, the walls around him would begin to fall. Revenge is not a straight line. It twists, it coils, it bites back when you least expect it. At first, everything was going according to my plan. My brother's name was beginning to slip in the papers. Investors grew nervous, partners whispered, and through it all, I remained invisible. But even in invisibility, you must be careful who you trust. I had Rahim, the loyal servant, who became my quiet ally. He brought me pieces of the puzzle, scraps of evidence my brother thought he had destroyed. With each discovery, I felt stronger, less forgotten, but Rahim wasn't enough. I needed someone who could help me move through the higher circles, someone who could walk among my brother's world without drawing suspicion. That's when I turned to my cousin. Layla and I had grown up side by side, sharing secrets under blankets, giggling at family gatherings, while the adults argued about money and business. She was the one person in the family who had never made me feel small. At least that's what I believed. When I told her what I suspected, that my brother had forged the will, that he may have even had a hand in my father's death, her eyes widened in shock. She grabbed my hands and whispered, "I'll help you. I'll stand by you." Her words felt like water to a starving soul. For the first time since my father's death, I didn't feel completely alone. Together, we began to move. She had access to parties, to whispered conversations, to people I couldn't reach. She slipped me information, names of people my brother paid off, rumors about deals gone wrong. With her by my side, I felt unstoppable, but revenge has a way of testing loyalty. One evening, Rahim came to me with a look on his face I'll never forget. His hands shook as he placed a newspaper on the table. The headline made my blood run cold. Anonymous sources accuse daughter of meddling in family business. The article painted me as bitter, unstable, desperate to cling to my father's legacy. Every word was twisted, but the details, the dates, the meetings, the whispers I had planted, they were too precise. Someone had betrayed me, and when I looked closer, I saw the fingerprints. It was Layla. She had sold me out. The cousin, who once swore she would stand by me, had chosen her side. My brother's side. I confronted her the next day, heart pounding in my chest. She didn't even flinch. "You think you can win against him?" She laughed coldly. "You're nothing, just a shadow clinging to the edges of this family." At least, I was smart enough to know where the power really is. Her words cut me deeper than I wanted to admit. Betrayal always cuts deepest when it comes from someone you loved. I walked away from her that night, but inside, something cracked. The world I was trying to fight, it was swallowing me whole. Everyone had a price. Everyone had a reason to betray. And the more I tried to tear down my brother's empire, the more I realized I was losing pieces of myself. I started waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing my father's voice whispering in my head, "Don't trust him anymore." Sometimes I wondered, would he be proud of me? Or would he see me as just another monster, feeding on revenge the way my brother fed on greed? But then, I would remember the look on my brother's face during the will reading. That smirk, that satisfaction at my ruin, and the fire inside me would roar back to life. If Layla wanted to stand against me, so be it. If my mother wanted to pretend I didn't exist, let her. If my brother thought he could silence me forever, he was wrong, because I wasn't fighting for scraps anymore. I was fighting for my father's truth. I was fighting for justice. And I was fighting for the girl I used to be, the one they tried to erase. I knew now what I had to do. The small leaks, the whispers, the subtle games, they weren't enough anymore. My brother was too powerful, too protected. If I wanted to bring him down, I would have to strike harder. I would have to risk everything, and that meant stepping out of the shadows and walking straight into the fire. When betrayal scorches you, you stop fearing the fire. And after Layla's knife in my back, I knew I couldn't afford hesitation anymore. My brother thought I was playing games in the shadows, whispers, anonymous leaks, small cracks in his empire. He thought he could swat me away like a fly. But I had decided, no more hiding. If I wanted to destroy him, I would have to step into his world. That began with the one place he believed I didn't belong, his business. I still had contacts. old acquaintances from the time when my father was alive and people still respected me as his daughter. Some pitied me, others were curious about the forgotten heiress turned outcast. I used every scrap of that curiosity to my advantage. I began attending the same events as my brother, the charity galas, the business dinners, the polished gatherings where people wore smiles sharper than knives. At first, when I walked into those glittering rooms, the whispers were unbearable. Isn't that her? Didn't her own father leave her with nothing? I heard she's obsessed with revenge, but I held my head high. I wore my silence like armor. And when people dared to ask, I only smiled. A smile sharper than my brother's smirk, and slowly, I began to notice something. The same people who whispered behind my back were also whispering behind his. His arrogance had started to wear thin. His deals were faltering. Partners were uneasy. He had built his empire on fear and manipulation. But the foundation was cracking, and I was ready to shatter it. One night, at a dinner hosted by one of his closest allies, I slipped away from the laughter and clinking glasses and found myself wandering down a quiet corridor. I don't know what pulled me there, instinct, fate, or something else, but halfway down the hall, I saw a door slightly ajar. Inside was a study. Not just any study, one lined with files, contracts, records. The kind of files my brother guarded more closely than his own life. My heart pounded as I slipped inside, closing the door behind me. I didn't have much time. I searched quickly, fingers shaking as I pulled open drawers, and then I found it. A folder marked with my father's initials. When I opened it, the air left my lungs. Inside were medical reports. Not just routine checkups, specialized tests, notes from doctors, pages that suggested my father had been poisoned over time. Slowly, methodically, substances slipped into his system that mimicked natural illness until his heart gave out, and attached to those reports were receipts for the very drugs that killed him, bought under fake names, transferred through shell accounts, but the handwriting on some of the notes, I recognized it. It wasn't my brother's. It was my mother's. I dropped the folder, my hands trembling. My mother, the woman who had stayed silent, the woman who told me survival meant standing beside my brother. She hadn't just chosen not to defend me, she had been part of it. My father hadn't simply died. He had been murdered. And my mother's hands were stained just as deeply as my brother's. The room spun. I pressed a hand against the desk, trying to steady myself, trying to breathe. My entire life, every memory, every belief about who my parents were, it shattered in that single moment. And then I heard footsteps. I grabbed the folder, shoved it into my bag, and slipped out through a side door just as the footsteps neared. My heart pounded all the way home, every beat screaming the truth. I wasn't just fighting a greedy brother anymore. I wasn't just fighting betrayal. I was fighting my own blood, my own mother. For days I couldn't bring myself to face her. I replayed every memory, her smile at the funeral, her cold words in the living room, her refusal to look me in the eye. It all made sense now. She wasn't silent because she was weak. She was silent because she was guilty, and yet I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. Because now my revenge had to change. It wasn't about reclaiming what was mine anymore. It was about exposing the truth. It was about tearing down every lie, every mask, until the world saw them for what they truly were. My brother thought he was untouchable. My mother thought she was safe behind him. But I had the proof, and I had nothing left to lose. The forgotten daughter was about to become their worst nightmare. The night I discovered the truth about my mother, sleep abandoned me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my father's words echoing in my mind. If anything happens to me, look deeper. I had looked deeper, and what I found nearly destroyed me. My father hadn't died of natural causes. He had been poisoned, slowly, cruelly, deliberately. And my mother, the woman who carried me in her womb, the woman whose hands once braided my hair, was part of it. People say betrayal from a stranger is painful. But betrayal from a parent, it tears something inside you that never truly heals. For days, I moved through the world like a ghost. I still played my part, the forgotten daughter, silent, defeated. My brother smirked at me at family gatherings, my mother avoided my eyes, and my cousin Layla paraded around like she'd chosen the winning side. They thought I was finished, but inside me, a storm raged louder than ever, because now I had a weapon. Proof. And if used at the right time, it could destroy them all. The question was, when? I knew I couldn't rush. My brother was too clever. My mother too cautious. If I struck too soon, they'd bury the evidence, twist the truth, and paint me as unstable, just as they had already begun to do. I needed to plan. I needed to be precise, but in the middle of my planning, someone unexpected stepped into my path. His name was Armin. I remembered him faintly from the past. He had once worked as an associate in my father's company. When my brother took over, Armin had been forced out, accused of incompetence. But the truth was simpler. He had refused to follow my brother's corrupt orders. One evening, as I was leaving a quiet CAF, he approached me. His face was older now, lined with struggles, but his eyes carried the same sharpness I remembered. "I know what they did to you," he said softly. My body froze. "What do you mean?" "I know your brother forged documents. I know he pushed you out. And I know your father's death wasn't as natural as they claim." My throat tightened. "How do you know?" He glanced around, lowering his voice. "Because I was there the night he collapsed. Your father called me hours before, told me he didn't trust your brother, told me he thought he was being poisoned. By the time I reached the house, it was too late. The ground seemed to vanish beneath my feet. Someone else knew. Someone had heard my father's last fears, his last cries for help. "Why are you telling me this now?" I whispered. "Because I've been waiting," Armin said. "Waiting for someone brave enough to fight him. I couldn't do it alone. But you're his sister. You have the power to finish what your father started." His words were a lifeline thrown into my drowning sea. For the first time since Rahim, I had an ally who wasn't bound by fear or greed. Someone who had lost just as much as I had. Together, we began to piece it all together. Rahim provided the hidden documents. Armin provided witness accounts, financial knowledge, connections. And I provided the resolve. The picture grew clearer with each passing day. My brother wasn't just corrupt, he was ruthless. He had silenced employees, manipulated accounts, even destroyed entire families who stood in his way. My mother hadn't been a bystander, she had enabled him, maybe even guided him. And now, standing at the center of it all, was me, the daughter they tried to erase, the seed they tried to bury. But I wasn't buried anymore. I was rising. Still, doubt gnawed at me. Late at night, I would sit alone with the folder of evidence, staring at my mother's handwriting. The woman who should have protected me had helped kill my father. Could I really expose her? Could I really drag my own mother into the fire? The answer came one evening, when I overheard a conversation at the mansion. My brother and my mother, talking in low voices in the study. She's too quiet, my brother muttered. I don't like it. She's harmless, my mother replied. She always was. Don't waste your energy. And then, after a pause, if she becomes a problem, we'll deal with her. We'll deal with her. Those words sliced the last thread of hesitation in me. They had already killed one parent. They would kill me too if I let them. So I decided, no more waiting, no more hesitation. It was time to start striking, and I would start with the one thing my brother valued most, his empire. Because if I couldn't destroy him yet in the eyes of the law, I would destroy him in the eyes of the world, and once his empire crumbled, the truth about my father's death would burn everything else to ash. Revenge had lived inside me like a whisper for so long, but now it was ready to roar. The first target was not my brother himself, but the very thing he worshipped most, his empire, his wealth, his power, his throne of lies. Armin and I worked quietly, carefully. Every empire has weak points. We just had to press hard enough. The cracks we had uncovered: hidden accounts, fraudulent deals, fake charities were more than enough to wound him. We began leaking them, piece by piece, to the right people. Not to the newspapers this time, but to investors, regulators, and watchdogs. People who had the power to choke him from the inside. At first, the results were small. A deal postponed, a contract cancelled, whispers of investigations. But then, like a storm breaking, it all began to unravel at once. One morning, I walked past a CAF and saw his face splashed across the news screens. Business magnate under investigation for fraud. I stood there, watching as the anchors spoke his name with suspicion, as analysts debated his fall. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to triumph. But victory, even small, is dangerous. It makes your enemies notice you. That same evening, Rahim warned me. They know. Your brother suspects you. I had expected it. But the reality still chilled me. My brother was not the kind of man who tolerated defiance. He wouldn't just try to silence me with words. And I was right. The attack came 2 nights later. I was driving home from a meeting with Armin when I noticed the headlights behind me. Too close, too steady. My grip on the wheel tightened as I turned into smaller streets. The car followed. Before I could react, it surged forward, slamming into the back of mine. My car skidded, spinning toward the edge of the road. Metal screamed against metal, glass shattered, and I barely managed to wrench the wheel enough to avoid flipping into the ditch. When the car behind me sped off into the night, I sat there, shaking, glass glittering in my hair. This was his warning. His message, my brother was telling me. Stop now or the next time. You won't live to fight back. For a moment, fear wrapped around my throat like a noose. I could have died. I could have been just another tragic accident, mourned briefly and forgotten. But then, I remembered my father's journal. His last words of mistrust, his fear, his silence before his death. If I stopped now, his murder would remain hidden forever. My brother and mother would keep their thrones of power and lies. No, I couldn't stop. The near death didn't break me. It hardened me. When I met Armin the next day, he looked at the bruises on my arms, the cut on my forehead, and said, "This is only the beginning. If you keep going, they'll come harder." "I know," I whispered. "But so will I, and I meant it. If my brother wanted war, he would have it." So we struck again, harder this time. This time, we targeted his pride. The charity gala he hosted every year, the one where he paraded his generosity and built his reputation as a man of the people. Through carefully planted evidence and timed leaks, we revealed the truth. The charity was nothing more than a shell, a way to launder money. The night before the gala, the story exploded across every major outlet. By the time he walked onto that stage, the cameras weren't applauding him. They were circling like vultures. I watched from the back of the hall as he tried to smile, tried to wave away the questions, but his mask was slipping. The golden sun, the untouchable king, his shine was cracking in front of the whole world, and in that moment, I knew he had finally seen me. Not the forgotten daughter, not the weak sister, but his enemy. After the gala, the message came. A single note slipped under my door. You won't win. You're alone. And soon you'll be nothing. But as I read those words, a bitter smile tugged at my lips, because he was wrong. I wasn't alone anymore. I had Rahim. I had Amen. And most importantly, I had the truth. And the truth, once unleashed, is a fire no empire can survive. The war had begun, and I was ready to burn everything, even myself, if it meant taking them down. When you go to war with family, the battlefield isn't just made of contracts and headlines. It's made of whispers, of poison carefully poured into ears, of reputation set on fire. And my brother, he was a master of that kind of war. The morning after the gala scandal, he struck back. Swift, brutal, public. The newspapers didn't just carry stories about his fraudulent charity anymore. They carried stories about me, estranged daughter obsessed with conspiracy, bitter sister wages smear campaign against brother, family insider or family traitor. My face was everywhere. My name dragged through every gutter. And the worst part, he didn't even need to invent new lies. He twisted pieces of truth. The fact that I lived in shadows, the fact that I had been angry, the fact that I had questioned my father's death and painted me as delusional, dangerous, jealous. It worked. People believed him because he had the power, the money, the polished charm that I never did. Even my mother added her voice. She went on television, eyes glistening with fake tears, saying how much it pained her to see me so lost in grief that I lash out at the family. Hearing her speak like that, cold, rehearsed, calculated, was worse than any knife in the back. My own mother, willing to bury me alive just to protect him. But it wasn't just words. He made sure my life became smaller every day. Jobs disappeared. Doors closed. People who once greeted me warmly now avoided me in the street. My phone stopped ringing. I was becoming an outcast in my own city. And then, he struck at the heart of the one thing I still had: loyalty. Rahim had stood by me through everything, quiet, steady, brave in his own humble way. He risked his life bringing me scraps of evidence. He had nothing to gain and everything to lose, which is why my brother decided to make him pay. One night, Rahim didn't come to meet me at the usual spot. I waited. An hour. 2. Nothing. My chest grew tight with dread. The next morning, I found out why. He had been beaten, left in an alley, his body broken, his spirit dimmed. When I rushed to see him, he tried to smile through the bruises. "Miss," he whispered, voice trembling, "don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop." That's what he wants. I held his hand, tears burning my eyes. "I'm so sorry, Rahim. This is my fight. And now you're paying the price." He squeezed my hand weakly. "Your father, he believed in you. I do too. Don't let them win." That night, sitting by his hospital bed, I felt the full weight of what I had started. This wasn't just about me anymore. My war was hurting people I loved. For the first time, the question clawed at me. Was revenge worth the blood of innocents? But when I thought of walking away, I saw my brother's smirk, my mother's crocodile tears, Layla's betrayal, my father's silent grave, and my doubt turned into rage. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was survival. Because if I didn't end them, they would end me. Armin came to me the next day, his face pale after hearing what happened to Rahim. We need to be careful. He's not just fighting to protect his empire, he's fighting to erase you. I looked at him, my voice steadier than I felt. Then we erase him first. The war lines were drawn. My brother had turned my own blood against me, destroyed my name, broken the man who stood by me, and in doing so, he had made me more dangerous than ever. Because I had nothing left to lose, every war reaches a point where hiding in the shadows isn't enough. If you want answers, you have to walk into the fire yourself. After Rahim's attack, I realized one thing. The only way to bring my brother down was to cut into the very core of his empire. His circle, his people, the ones who whispered in his ear, carried out his orders, cleaned up his sins. That's where the truth about my father's death still lived, and I was going to rip it out. But getting close to him was like approaching a lion with bare hands. You had to move carefully, or you'd be torn apart. That's where Armin's contacts came in. One of them was a mid-level fixer, a man who handled logistics for my brother's private operations. His name was Salman. He was greedy, reckless, always in debt. The kind of man who could be swayed. Armin arranged a meeting. I'll never forget the way Salman looked at me the first time. Suspicious, calculating. You're playing with fire, he muttered. Your brother doesn't forgive betrayal. If he even suspects you, I don't need forgiveness. I cut him off. My voice didn't even shake. I need the truth, and I'm willing to pay for it. His eyes gleamed at that word. Pay. Everyone has a price, and I had learned how to spend mine wisely. Over weeks, Salman became my reluctant informant. Bits and pieces trickled in meetings held at odd hours, payments made in untraceable cash, names of men who had disappeared after doing his dirty work. And then one night, over whiskey and smoke, he let something slip. The old man never wanted to change his will, Salman said, almost laughing. But you know your brother. He doesn't take no for an answer. My heart stopped. My father. His will. I leaned closer. What are you saying? But Salman's lips clamped shut, as if he'd already said too much. That single hint was enough to confirm my worst fear. My father's death wasn't natural. It was orchestrated. And my brother had been at the center of it. Still, suspicion wasn't proof. I needed evidence. So I did the unthinkable. I decided to face my brother directly. He hosted a private dinner for his closest allies once a month. A place where strategies were whispered over wine, where masks slipped just enough to show the face beneath. With Armin's help, I got myself in as someone's +1. That night, I stepped into his world. The chandeliers glowed like captured stars, the table glittered with crystal and gold, and laughter rang heavy with arrogance. Men and women leaned close, trading secrets like currency, and there he was, my brother. When his eyes landed on me across the room, the smile froze on his lips. Shock flickered, then rage. But with so many witnesses, he couldn't drag me out. He had to play the game. He raised his glass. Ah, my long-lost sister. What an unexpected surprise. I smiled back, my heart thundering in my chest. Family should visit more often, don't you think? The tension that night could have sliced glass. He played the charming host, but his eyes never left me, dark and burning, and in that room, between the toasts and false laughter, I finally saw it, the cracks. The way his hand clenched a little too tightly around his glass whenever someone mentioned legacy, the way silence fell when one of the older men teased, "Pity your father isn't here to see how far you've come." For a brief second, I saw guilt flash across his face. Guilt. Or fear. That was when I knew. My father hadn't died in his sleep. He had been silenced. And my brother, with my mother by his side, had orchestrated it. The proof was still hidden, but the truth was finally clear. That night, as I walked out of his glittering fortress, I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt fire. They had stolen my father's life. And now, I would take everything from them piece by piece, breath by breath, until they knew what it meant to lose. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was justice, and I would drag it out of them, no matter how much blood it took. Knowing the truth is one thing, proving it is another. I had walked into my brother's glittering kingdom, stared him in the eye, and seen the guilt flicker like a shadow across his face. My father's death had not been fate. It had been arranged, but whispers and suspicions could not bring down an empire. I needed evidence, cold, hard, undeniable proof, and that meant returning to the one place I had sworn never to enter again, my father's study. After his death, my brother had locked it up, claiming it was too painful for the family to step inside. That was a lie. He wasn't protecting grief. He was protecting secrets. Armin helped me the night we broke in. The house stood silent, the corridors heavy with memories. I could almost hear my father's voice as I walked down the hall. When I pushed open the study door, the smell of leather and old books wrapped around me like a ghost. I searched every drawer, every shelf, every corner, while Armin kept watch. Hours passed. Nothing. Until finally, beneath a false bottom in my father's desk, I found it. A journal. The pages were filled with his handwriting, his doubts, his fears. And then I saw the line that made my blood run cold. Zahir is pressuring me to amend the will. I will not do it. He does not deserve the legacy. If anything happens to me, remember these words. It was not by God's hand, but by theirs. I couldn't breathe. My father had left me his truth. He had known, and he had tried to warn me, but before I could even let the relief wash over me, I heard the sound that froze me to the floor. Footsteps. Not Armin's. Too soft, too deliberate. When I looked up, my mother was standing in the doorway. Her face was pale in the half-light, her eyes sharp as knives. She didn't even glance at the journal in my hands. She already knew what I had found. "You should not be here," she whispered. I wanted to shout at her, demand answers, force her to admit what she had done. But my voice came out low, trembling with fury. "You helped him. You stood by and watched as he killed his own father." She flinched, just for a moment. Then her mask returned. Cold, untouchable. "You think you understand power, but you don't," she said. "Your father was weak. He would have given everything away, ruined us all. Zahir saved this family." My hands shook as I held the journal tighter. "Saved us? He destroyed us. He murdered the man who gave us life. And you let him." Her eyes glistened, but her voice remained steel. "I chose survival. And if you had any sense, you would do the same. Stop this war before it kills you." I stepped closer, my voice steady now. "No, Mother. I will stop it, but not by surrendering. By ending him. By ending you." For the first time, I saw fear flicker in her gaze, not because I threatened her life, but because she realized she no longer had control over me. She stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, her words a final warning: careful, my daughter. The closer you come to victory, the closer you come to death. When she was gone, I sank into my father's chair, clutching the journal to my chest. My hands were trembling, but my heart was steady. I had proof now. My father's own words. But proof was only a weapon if the world saw it, and bringing it into the light meant exposing myself completely. No more shadows. No more whispers. From that moment, I knew this war had escalated beyond repair. It was no longer just me against my brother. My mother was on the battlefield too, and this time, there would be no retreat. The truth had weight. My father's journal wasn't just words on paper, it was a weapon. A flame capable of burning my brother's empire to ash. I spent days preparing. Armin helped me plan the release carefully, ensuring that the world would see the proof without giving my brother a chance to twist it. Investors, media, authorities, everyone would know the truth. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to imagine the fall, his smirk replaced by panic, his empire crumbling, my mother exposed. Justice finally served, but revenge is never simple. And power has a way of striking back. The day I planned to go public, I received a call from Rahim. His voice was strained, urgent. Don't do it today. They know something's coming. Your brother, he's preparing something. It's big, dangerous. My chest tightened. I wanted to argue, to tell him I couldn't wait, that the world needed to know. But instinct told me he was right. Even so, waiting meant everything could change. I decided to take a risk. Just one step closer. I scheduled a private meeting with a journalist I trusted, a woman who had no ties to my family, no loyalty to my brother, no reason to be swayed by fear or bribery. When I handed her the journal, my hands trembled not with fear, but anticipation. This, I whispered, is what they don't want the world to see. She nodded gravely. I'll handle this carefully. But be ready. They won't go quietly. And she was right. That night, my apartment was broken into. Not random thieves. Professional. Precise. They left no trace except a single message, etched into my living room wall. Stop, or everything you love dies. The fear was immediate. My pulse raced. Rahim was recovering. Armin was out, and now my sanctuary had been violated. I realized then what my brother had become. A predator who would destroy anything and anyone in his path. But the threat didn't break me. It sharpened me. The next morning, the journalist contacted me. Her voice was tight. They're escalating. They've traced the journal back to you. If you release it now, it will put you directly in danger. I paused. The world I had built in my mind, the image of my brother falling, was suddenly at odds with reality. Exposure meant risk. Exposure meant war. But I couldn't turn back. The moment I stepped outside, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. You should have stayed in the shadows, my brother's voice said, low, cold and lethal. Now, everything you love will burn with you. He hung up. It was no longer a threat. It was a promise. That night, I sat alone, journal in hand, tears streaking my face. Rahim's attack, my mother's betrayal, the warnings, the threats, they all collided inside me. But then I remembered my father's words in that journal. If anything happens to me, look deeper. Justice must prevail. I realized what he had meant. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. As I made my choice, I would release the journal. I would bring the truth into the light. And I would face whatever came next, because I had already lost everything to betrayal and murder. There was nothing left to fear. The storm was coming, and I would be the one to unleash it. The world had to know. When the journalist released my father's journal, it was like dropping a bomb into a quiet city. Headlines screamed across every platform. Family empire shattered. Daughter reveals father's murder and fraud. Inside the secrets your favorite tycoon tried to hide. Mother and brother implicated in heiress investigation. I watched from the shadows as my phone buzzed endlessly, messages from media, authorities, even strangers who had once admired my brother now calling for justice. The city, the empire, the family, they all shook. My brother's reaction came fast. Television interviews, emergency board meetings, frantic phone calls. But his carefully constructed mask was cracking. He tried to spin the story, calling me delusional, bitter, and obsessed. He painted himself as a victim, claiming the journal was forged, but the evidence was undeniable. The handwriting, the receipts, the financial trails, the medical reports. It couldn't be hidden. My mother, on the other hand, vanished from the public eye. No interviews, no statements. Silence. For once, she couldn't manipulate the narrative. The fallout within the family was immediate. Layla stopped returning calls. Old friends distanced themselves. Everyone who had once pretended to support me now faced a choice: loyalty to the truth or loyalty to power. I felt the weight of it all, but I didn't falter. Every lie she and my brother had told, every betrayal, every calculated smile, I now held it in the palm of my hand, exposed for the world to see. The confrontation came unexpectedly. It was a private dinner, arranged by my mother, supposedly to discuss the family in calm. I knew better. As I walked into the room, I felt her gaze, cold and sharp, measuring me. My brother sat opposite, his jaw tight, eyes burning. "You went too far," my mother said, voice steady, controlled. "This ends tonight." I smiled, calm. "No, mother. This only begins tonight. The world knows. Your lies, your betrayal, everything." For the first time, she looked unsure. My father's journal had stripped her of her power. She had counted on my fear, my hesitation. But fear had been replaced by determination. "You'll ruin us all," my brother growled, leaning forward, the mask of control slipping. I leaned back, letting the words hang. "I already have. And the truth will finish what you started." Then, in front of both of them, I laid out the evidence: the journal, the medical reports, the financial documents. Every lie exposed, every betrayal revealed. Their reactions were priceless. Shock, denial, anger, all mixed with fear. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her glass. My brother's face flashed, veins standing out on his neck. "You think this changes anything?" My brother spat. "I can destroy you. I will destroy you." But now it was too late. The authorities were already reviewing the evidence. The media had already begun broadcasting the revelations. The empire that had once seemed untouchable was unraveling before their eyes, and I felt a sense of liberation I hadn't known in years. For the first time, I wasn't just fighting shadows. I was standing in the light. Yet even in victory, the battle wasn't over. My mother, once untouchable, now loomed as a different kind of threat: someone desperate, someone cornered, capable of anything to survive. My brother, humiliated, was furious, dangerous, and unpredictable. But I had learned something over the months of betrayal. planning, and revenge. Strength isn't just in power. Strength is in persistence, in truth, in knowing what you're willing to fight for even when the world is against you. And now the world was watching. The war had moved from shadows into full view. And I was no longer afraid, because for the first time, I knew who I truly was. The forgotten daughter, the avenger, the heir to justice, and the reckoning had only just begun. The storm I had carried inside me for years was finally breaking. Everything, the betrayal, the lies, the murders, the manipulation culminated in this moment. My father's truth was exposed. My brother's empire was crumbling. My mother's carefully constructed feuds was shattered. But the final confrontation wasn't in the press, the authorities, or even in public opinion. It was in the house, the very mansion where betrayal had begun, where loyalty had been twisted into fear, where my life had been threatened more times than I could count. I entered the room, journal in hand, my heart steady. My brother sat at the head of the table, angry, humiliated, wild-eyed. My mother stood behind him, cold and calculating, yet I could see the fear there, thin as glass. You think you've won? My brother spat. Everything you've done, it's nothing. I can destroy you. I still control everything. I smiled, calm. Control is an illusion. You had it because no one questioned you. But now, everyone knows, and power built on fear crumbles under truth. My mother stepped forward, her voice smooth, poisonous. Don't make this personal. You could have joined us. We could have rebuilt this together. I shook my head, the fire in me unwavering. No, you destroyed family. You destroyed trust. You killed him. And now, you will face the consequences. Her eyes flickered. I knew she was calculating, looking for any opening to survive. But it was too late. I held the proof of her betrayal in my hands, the journal, the medical reports, the financial documents. The world would know. My brother lunged, furious. But I was ready. Not with violence, but with the power of truth. I placed the documents in front of both of them. This isn't about money anymore. It's about justice. They could see it in my eyes. I was unstoppable, unyielding, and no threat could break me. For a moment, silence ruled. The air was thick with tension. Then, slowly, my mother lowered her gaze. My brother slumped back, exhausted, realizing the empire he had built on lies was collapsing. The legal authorities moved quickly. Within days, investigations were launched. My brother's financial empire was frozen. Key allies turned against him, and my mother faced charges as an accomplice. Layla disappeared from public view, her arrogance and betrayal now irrelevant. Rahim recovered, his loyalty rewarded by truth and safety. Arman remained my guide, my anchor, helping me navigate the chaos I had unleashed. And me, I finally stepped into my own life, not as a victim, not as the forgotten daughter, but as the woman who survived betrayal, uncovered murder, and demanded justice. Sitting in my father's study, holding the journal he had left me, I realized something profound. Revenge is not hatred. Revenge is reclamation. Power taken back from those who tried to destroy you. Truth revealed when lies seemed invincible. I looked out the window at the city below. The storm had passed, and the world was watching the aftermath. I had lost much. Along the way, trust, peace, and the illusion of a normal family. But I had gained something far greater: clarity, strength, and the knowledge that even in the face of ultimate betrayal, I could rise. The daughter they tried to erase was finally free, and the reckoning, the revenge, the justice, it was complete. And that is where my story ends. A story born from betrayal, carried through shadows of manipulation, and finished with the light of truth. I learned that family is not always blood, and blood is not always loyal. I learned that silence can be more dangerous than words, and that sometimes survival means burning bridges that should never have been built. But most of all, I learned that revenge is not about hatred. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself they tried to destroy. If you've stayed with me through this journey, thank you. Your presence means the story was not told in vain. Remember, every scar tells a story. Every secret eventually finds the light, and every forgotten voice can rise again. This was my truth, my reckoning, my freedom, and perhaps it can also be a reminder for you that even in betrayal, you can rise stronger than ever before.